Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of our new podcast, Client Horror Stories, and I'm honored to have Rachel Smith from England with me today with a great and a story with some good lessons she was just telling me about. Let's jump right in. Rachel, happy to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yes, this one client is probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and looking back now, there probably were some huge warning signs, but at the time you don't really see it. But it has helped me recognize the signs for next time. Hopefully, there isn't a
For
next
next
time.
time.
But this
You want to
was
make different mistakes in the future, not the same mistake
yeah,
over and
different
over.
mistakes is fine, just not the same mistakes. This is a classic story of other people in the business or agency where you work at who, like CEOs or managing directors, who, because they run the business, think they know the jobs inside out of every single person in the department. So obviously it was a digital marketing agency. This guy thought he could build a website. He thought he could run a successful PPC campaign, so, like all at the same time.
The CEO of the agency or the client?
Yeah, sorry, the CEO of the
Yeah.
agency that I worked at.
He thought he could do everything.
Basically, and as we know, being a PPCer or in social media, it's a job within itself. That's why we
Yes.
exist.
That's why they're
Um,
specialists.
Yeah, exactly. And it was this long legacy client, which is probably the first warning flag. If it's such a legacy client, maybe pay attention to some of the strong relationships that have already been built with other people in the agency if you're new to the project. And this client was having meetings with the
I feel like,
CEO.
just want to interrupt for a second. Something I've seen in my experience is it's often the longest clients that get the least love from agencies. So like it feels like agencies often take for granted clients that have been around forever, and over time give them less and less. So that's already a sign, knowing that it's been a long time legacy client. Have you noticed this pattern too?
That's really interesting, because I don't know if it's maybe a very British thing on our side, but like the legacy clients who are on a really low management fee are probably actually the ones that are massively overserviced, because they have been such a legacy client that they're so terrified of them going elsewhere that and you've also got stuck in a routine. Their management fees haven't been increased along with new clients coming on board, and they're very demanding, and there may have been a relationship there before, like they were at the same men's club together, whatever. But I think it's quite a British thing that these
If they went to the
clients,
same men's club thing, it's definitely a British thing, because Americans don't really do that.
maybe it is then, because they kind of like, they don't want to upset the apple cart, if you will, with people who've been with them for so long, and actually probably suck up the most time and are therefore the most unprofitable. But we're far too British to say anything. Like, oh no, it's fine. Have all our time. It's fine. No, we'll do it for free. It's probably
There's a version of Client Heart Stories we can do just for the UK, where everyone is so nice and so respectful. No one actually figures out what the problems are until it's too late.
that would be that would be so funny. I remember it's not digital marketing related, but I remember it was an article about Americans who had been watching the Great British Bake Off. They were like, this is a competition, but you're helping each other. Like, yes, that's what we do.
Wow, that's like a whole other universe.
I know, I don't really, now I've said it out loud, it's ridiculous. It's true, and it's ridiculous. But yeah, this that was probably the first warning sign that there was because we were new to my team were new to doing PPCs for this client, and the senior members of the agency were having meetings with this client, but not having anybody who was doing the digital marketing within the meeting. So at first we were kind of like, well, maybe it's just, maybe one of those, a meeting about a meeting. They're probably just, having a good old chat and not actually doing anything. We'll be invited to the next meeting. And we just
So,
found, we really,
by the way, that's already a warning sign. Like if your boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss is meeting clients without you, and you're the account manager working on it, that's when the light yellow flag starts turning deep yellow.
yeah, exactly.
So question, when the boss's boss started meeting with the client without you, like overstepping you, did you at that time voice to say, hey, I want to attend the meetings? Or
I think the first time or so that it happened, I remember seeing the client leave and I was like, oh, Mr. Jones was here, fake name. That's another thing, because my surname's Smith. If my husband and I check in at a hotel and say, yes, it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, everybody always thinks we're having an affair and that it's not actually real. My friend, so Mr. Jones, for example, I was like, I didn't realize he was in. Is there something that I should have I not been invited? Did I miss something? No, it's fine, don't worry about it. We'll catch up about it. Oh, okay then. Because I was told, like, don't worry, we'll speak to you about it. I kind of didn't really, I don't know, I believed it.
You believe it. So this is actually an interesting situation, because often when I've been having done a dozen client horror stories interviews now, it's usually the client is being crazy. But here, like you haven't told me anything about the client, but it seems like your boss is acting fishy. So there's at least some internal issue going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think it wasn't anything malicious. I think it was, I didn't really think about that. It was kind of like, come on, that was a bit obvious that, we should have been, well, obviously as we get through to the story, it wasn't done. I mean, there were elements or points at times where I did think, is this being done to trip us up or to trip me up? But then it was a very, very high value client. And I don't think, looking back now, it wasn't done to trip us up. But it did cross your mind at times because what was happening just seemed so bonkers and so illogical. Just didn't make sense.
I think I'm going to start using the word bonkers in my vocabulary. So this weird meeting happened between the boss's boss's boss that you should have been in, and you were. You said, okay, I'll catch you up on it later. Did he catch you up on it later? Or no? Okay. So the weirdness continues.
I carried on kind of like business as usual, doing what I was doing. Obviously, ultimately, at the end of the day, getting the best return on investment for his ad spend, because unless there's something specific like a CPA target, or, obviously getting the most bang for your buck is the most logical and what normally clients want.
Yes.
Turns out I was wrong. So wrong, which just sounds ridiculous. But the next thing that happened was I delivered the monthly report, and just say, for argument's sake, that the PPC spend was £1,000 or $1,000. Okay. It wasn't. It was much, much, much higher. But just for example,
easy math, right?
Just for easy maths, yeah, exactly. And I'd spent
easy maths. Because in England they say maths, not math.
Maths, we do. You'll have to do a tally, and at the end, when you do back editing, see how many Britishisms I come out with that I don't realise are. And in the podcast, you have like a ding every time I say one.
Ding. We have like a thought bubble, Batman and Robin style.
Yes.
Bingo.
Brilliant. So just say, for example, I think it was around like £960 that I'd spent out of the £1,000 budget. Obviously, you should always try and spend the budget as long as you're getting the best return on investment. Or if there's a particular month where you're prepared to take more of a loss because of competition or whatever, stuff that's been pre-agreed.
Yes.
And I was like I was pulled in. I was like, Rachel, why haven't you spent all of the budget? Right. Well, I have more or less. It's not like I'd spent £500 or something
You got
significant.
almost, you're at like 99% of the budget.
Yeah, exactly. And they were like, he was like looking at the report. Okay, well, can you try and spend the budget next time? Yeah, of course. I always will, but I want to make sure they're not making a loss. And then it was just a bit of a weird conversation. I was brought into the office, and then
But
um,
I want to observe what's also weird about that is, if you know anything about running Google ad campaigns, it's kind of impossible to target like to the exact number, uh, because like Google says every day they can go up to X% over. So you can never get it exactly to that 1000 number.
it's impossible. I mean, there have been
Impossible.
times where I've looked at the spend and it's going, oh, it's got spent £990 and 99 pence, and felt it quite, oh, it's quite satisfying actually that I've got that close. Just pure fluke. And the the manager who was talking to me, he was like, well, I've run Facebook ads before, so I know that you can spend the budget. And I was like, well, there's your first mistake, because Facebook has lifetime budgets, whereas I know there is some weird, it just doesn't work as well like that for Google ads. It's, you work it out on a monthly basis. You can alter your ads depending on ad spend based on what's left, but it's nigh on impossible to spend to the penny. And he was like, well, I disagree with you. And that was another flag, because I'm like, who's the expert here? And within this same set of campaigns, go on.
So it's interesting. So these flags so far, it's all with your boss, and I want to make a general observation. The rules and how the good ways to work with your clients, it's identical to working with your boss. Like, in a way, your boss is your client. So so this is a bit of a client boss story, but it's the same lessons. So this is great.
And I thought it was a bit like, oh, like, okay, but I don't really want to sort of, I tried to sort of like stress my point and, gently educate him, but he wasn't having any of it. So I came out of this meeting a bit like perplexed. I was like, that did that just happen? That didn't really seem to make much sense. And then I think it was the next month, I'd spent near enough the budget, but before that next report came out, my manager had another meeting with this client, but over the phone. And because
without you inviting, so there was another secret meeting.
Yeah, this time this one followed up with some notes, just some typed up notes, and it said, please make sure you spend all of the budget, in bold, like highlighted, so like, this is really important. I was like, okay. So the next month came, and I think I spent something like $990. Like, it was so close again. And next thing I know, I'm being dragged into a meeting with my manager, and he's having a go at me about the ad spend. And I was like, are we really talking about this? £10 off, $10 off, is it really that much of an issue? Yes, well, I've agreed with the client that the most important thing and the most important strategy that is that they spend their budget to the penny. And I was like, so this is my overall KPI? Yes. Well, that's been agreed without me? Yes. So the KPI is literally spend the budget? Yes. So there's ultimately the book stops with, so, he was, as much as I tried to be professional and, educate him, at the end of the day, he was like, no, this is it. And I stressed my concern in reply to that email, because I think it's really important to have a paper trail of everything.
Agreed.
I try not to come across as really like passive aggressive or anything like that. I just reply, thanks so much for just letting us catch up now. I'm just putting an email just for both our benefits, what we spoke about, just so you know, if we ever need to refer to it again. And I wrote everything down, and
So,
nothing came back
two
from.
comments on that. One, I love the meeting notes. It's of the core Morgan processes of how to work in a healthy way. I obsessively write down and share everything. It just, people always misremember things. And this funny thing happens in the human mind. When people misremember things, it's always to your own advantage and the other person's detriment. So doing real-time shared notes is amazingly powerful and avoids so many confusions. I also want to make another point about your boss's attitude on this issue. I feel like there's a difference between how you treat a professional and how you treat a technician. Like the technician is the one where you say, come in and do this little thing, this little thing, this little thing. The pipe is broken, go fix it like this. But the professional is more the person whose advice you listen to. Hey, I have this problem. Help me figure out how to solve it, and then go solve it. So it feels like you were hired to be a professional, but he was treating you like the little technician. So this is one of the sources of the disconnect.
Yeah, definitely. And looking back now, especially with the note writing thing, I'm so glad I did. I mean, it wasn't contested as such, but looking back at how bonkers that request was, like I occasionally looked back at the email to be like, no, this is correct, this is what I'm meant to be doing. And I actually said, you know, but if he's getting a lower, you'd rather me spend £1,000 and get 600% ROAS, return on ad spend, rather than spending £900 and getting 800% ROAS. He was like, yes. Like, how in anybody's mind is that logical? Unless there's some sort of scenario or situation that I've never come across.
In the meeting, did you ask him explicitly for his logic?
Probably not as outright as I should have done, but I'm quite known amongst my friends that I find it very hard to hide my facial expressions. I'll get that out eventually. It's because it's the second gin I'm on. That's why. It's a bank holiday in the UK, so I'm allowed.
And speaking of Britishisms, you're like, obviously the Brits gonna be drinking while we talk.
Of course, it's what time is it? 20 to 8 here, so I'm allowed. What time is it with you now?
You probably have your fish and chips to go with it as well. I
had fish and chips last night for tea for dinner.
You really are British. The rumors are true.
I'm that predictable. And gin as well, obviously.
Right. Okay, so one, I like in these podcasts learning what you could have or should have done differently, and it seems like one way you could have improved was at that point to have pressed him to understand the reasoning. I think if your client or your boss wants you to do something that's so insane, like spend accounts at levels that you know aren't profitable, that like that's so insane, it's incumbent upon you to like figure out what's actually really happening.
Yeah, definitely. I think if I was in a similar situation now, I would definitely be, you know, more, I'd be polite, but I'd be like, no, this is wrong. I mean, unless you can give me some sort of logical explanation about why this is what needs to happen, tell me, because it just doesn't make any sense from a marketer's point of view. Tell me what your actual thinking is behind this, so I can understand if there's something that I'm completely missing.
Okay, so you didn't tell him, but then like what happened next?
So I mean, I passed this on to the colleague who was, so I was looking after this little team, and my colleague was explicitly looking after this account, and he was like, this is ridiculous. I'm like, I know it is, but as management goes, you know, it gets slopey shouldered on to the next person, doesn't it? I said, but please do it, just to prove a point this month, or it's going to be my head. I've got it in writing that that is what they want. So it's not, nothing's going to be on you. If anything, it's going to be on me. Just please do it. And then I think for whatever, but I think there may have been a bank holiday or something that month. So the industry that it was in naturally quietened off.
Right.
So I could see with about 3 weeks into the month, I'm like, oh God, we're not on track to hit the spend. And and even though I know it was still bonkers, I wanted to do it to prove a point, but also just gauge the reaction from the manager when I say, look, just because you spend more doesn't automatically mean you're going to be more profitable or make more money. There's a lot more to that, isn't there, rather than literally just cranking up the budgets. Because it was a kind of a client where we couldn't make the changes as freely as we would like. For the product that it was, there was a lot of things that you couldn't say about the product, because it was like border on like a medical product, so you had to be very careful. So any ad copy or extensions, whatever that we changed, had to go for approval. Or even if it was, you know, adjusting the budget on a certain product, we did have to get. So that's another flag that we haven't got as much. I understand from like the medical or, you know, things, but I think if I was the client, I'd make sure that my marketing execs that were working on the account had almost like a Bible of things that you can and cannot say. But when it got to the fact that there was almost like a level of micromanaging, that we didn't have the freedom to make it as profitable as we wanted to, that was an issue as well.
I see. So this other yellow flag was basically them micromanaging in the sense that every little change you had to get their approval for.
Yeah, and had to justify why.
You had to justify it too.
So that was again, that's probably another case of, it was such a legacy client and they'd been so pandered to in the past that they hadn't had somebody saying, look, you're paying us, just pay us to do our jobs. You know, let us prove to you that we can make a good return on this, you know, and you know, take your company to the next level. So that was another issue as well. And then I think that's it, we got to the next month and the campaign spent just over £1,000.
Oh no, the extra $2 were spent.
Like, it was a couple of pounds. It was barely anything. But I thought, well, we've underspent a couple in the other couple of months as well, and they'd rather spend more. So, you know, if it was like, you know, 40-50% more that they'd spent, then obviously, right. But, you know, it was literally pennies. You know, I thought it'll be okay. I mean, I'll just take the rap for it. Well, the manager, who is essentially kind of like the client, on behalf of the client, absolutely lost his mind because we'd overspent by about £1 or £2. And before, not specific to this client, we had talked about tackling the problem of overspends. So we have, for most clients, or since then and even up to now, if they're very strict on budget, I have scripts. So if it hits a certain spend, it pauses the campaigns. Obviously, you know, you try and manage it as much, you know, to stretch it out, payday, but worst case scenario, if they hit over their absolute upper limit, it shuts the campaigns off. And the manager had said to me, I do not want a script on this account. So I said, if I'm pushing the budgets, I want that kind of like backstop, you know, to prevent any sort of, you know, overspend. Because you know what it's like, if you were up a campaign budget and it could be trundling and then it will, you know, shoot off because, you know, Google, you know, reckons that it's going to be more profitable, and there's, you know, definitely more than 10% than what Google said.
Right.
Just as kind of like, just to cover my back. And again, that was another warning sign that the manager had told me to not follow process, which we had in place and agreed for every other single client.
Ooh, actually, this is a good warning sign that hasn't come up in any of the previous ones so far, of explicitly asking you to break process. That's a huge no-no. Like it's understandable in cases where the company is young and there isn't yet a solidified process, but old client, you've been doing this for a while, there's a protocol. When they say go against a protocol, like either there has to be such an amazing reason, or like that's when the yellow flag becomes a red flag.
Yeah. And it was very much like my process that I'd put in place, you told me not to do. The whole point of that process has just been proven, this is what happens.
Exactly.
But also, why are you losing your mind over a couple of pounds?
What's also curious about this, and I'm sure soon we'll get to the reason for us to insist on this, but it's interesting, like all the time and energy you spent on this, like if you look at whatever salary you were being paid, you're being paid more per hour than the £2 that were over underpaid. So it's like not even worth an hour of your time on this.
But I said, if it's that much of an issue, I said, I will pay the £2. And it's probably quite, sarky of me, but the boss was like, oh, no, you're just being ridiculous. I'm like, I'm being ridiculous? Let's just look back at everything that's happened over the past few months. Yeah, I'm the one that's being ridiculous. And then,
by the way, that's another Britishism. It's quite starky of you. I can guess the definition of that word, but today it's a new word that I've learned today.
See, it's an education for you in the world of Britishisms.
Absolutely.
And so I mean, we got past that. It was kind of like I got a telling off for it. And I requested a meeting. I said, look, because that one, when he told me about, we talked about the ad spend, it was very much like off the cuff. I was like, we need to sit down here and we need to talk about, what the actual KPIs for this client is, because nobody is benefiting from this. We're not, because it's becoming unprofitable because the amount of time and energy that we're spending on it. And also, how is it going to be beneficial for the client? At the end of the day, if they want to make the most money that they can, and if I'm there spending my energy in the ad campaign trying to work out the budgets and making sure it spends to the penny, which is insane, I'd never do that again. I would just say no and use the story.
It's incredible how often people don't recognize that time is always a trade-off. If for the couple hours you have to spend on this, if it's really focused on the budget, you'll just have less time and emotional energy to say, okay, how do I find the best keywords and come up with the best ads? So those will clearly be neglected.
I used to at another agency that I worked at, we used something called, I can't remember the life of me, but the name of it, but it was a tool where basically you logged how long you were spending on a client. And I remember the team going, oh, this is just like Big Brother. And I was like, well, no, actually, because at the end of the month, it does flag, oh, I've maybe not spent enough time on them. I'll make sure I'll make up for it next month. Or hang on a minute, here's a red flag. This is completely unprofitable. And then when you take how long you've been working on it, you can work out the maths on, how much you're making, if anything, or if, you're losing out. And whether you need to up your management fees or do something else.
Exactly.
So it was a really good tool. I mean, I dread to think if I was logging this client what the hours would have been on it. But the next month came around, and the ad spend for this month, I think, hit something like 998. It was as close as I could have got it without being
without going crazy.
Yeah, and it wasn't good enough. I couldn't believe it.
It still wasn't good enough.
It still wasn't good enough. And I was like, this is where this manager needed an education in digital marketing, because I could create a company that buys clothes and then sells it on, make my own. Do you have ASOS in the States or something like,
no idea what you're talking about.
like a clothing brand, like ASOS are huge in the UK. I'm just trying to think of what like an American equivalent would be, like Nasty Gal.
Girls might know that brand. I know the really poor. I know the boring brands. I know H&M.
H&M, there you go, like an
Okay.
H&M. I don't know why I didn't go with that example anyway, why I had to start like go to really granular. But it doesn't mean that I could start up that business, but it doesn't know that I would mean I'd know anything about manufacturing clothes.
Right.
I just know how to run a business or start a business. But I wouldn't ever pretend that I know just for my own bravado or just to make myself feel better. I would want to learn, and I'd want to, and if somebody tried to tell me, I'd be like, I wouldn't be, no, I know this, I know it better than you because I'm the boss of this company. It means nothing. It means nothing ultimately at the end of the day. And I think,
So,
go on.
So did you use this as opportunity to give him an education? Say it's just impossible.
I said, I want to be in the next meeting when the client comes in. I said, and I want to be here. And I will make sure I'm in this meeting. If it's not in my invite, I will come into the meeting and introduce myself, and just, sit down, and because I want to actually understand where this client is coming from rather than just hearing it from, secondhand. I want to actually understand what the client's thought process was.
There's this additional risk factor of like the children's game of broken telephone as well. Just like with you not communicating with the client, it just adds in this misunderstanding.
And I think one of the biggest things in our job as PPC is not just being absolutely awesome at PPC, is communication. I mean, or if you're somebody who is more data driven and you have somebody who runs a team, but ultimately who has somebody in that team who knows PPC has to be in that meeting with the client.
Absolutely. The more steps you are removed, and the more confusion always comes. Okay, so you force yourself into the next meeting, and did you attend the next meeting?
I do attend the next meeting, and it's sort of like, there's all the niceties, like pussyfooting around each other, talking about things and just business in general. And then we got to sort of like the PPC section, and I was basically like, help me understand, what is your ultimate goal for your PPC campaigns? He was like, well, make as much money as possible. Make me a millionaire overnight. If I had £1 for every time I'd heard that phrase, make me a millionaire overnight with PPC. I was like, if I could do that, do you think I'd be working in PPC? No.
By the way, in Morganland, when someone tells me, make me the American equivalent of the same phrase, to me that flag itself is a little bit of a warning, because it to me tells them we're a bit naive, because you can't make unless you win the lottery, like you can't strategically make $1 million overnight. It always requires focus, hard work, time, trade-offs, clever strategies. So it's like be realistic. Okay, but by the way, the client wanted to make money at least makes more sense than just wanting to spend that his ad budget.
And what I had ultimately learned from that meeting was the client had said, quite flippantly, but also quite seriously, well, if you spend the money, you'll get more money. So what I think...
I see. So because the management fee was like 5% of the ad spend or something. So as a result, if they spent more, you get, if you spend $2 more, you get the 5% of the $2, that extra dime.
Exactly. And that's when it clicked. I thought, that's it. Because the client wanted us to prove that we could spend the budget as is. And then if there was room for growth, if there was room for more, if we were missing out on budget, that he was like, well, if you can spend that money and there's room to spend another grand and you keep up the results, then yeah, you can have it.
I see. I see.
And what
Oh,
had
okay.
happened, what I'd figured out was the manager was like dollar signs in his
Dollars.
eyes. He was like, oh my God, so if I can prove that I can spend this money and, this agreed budget that we cannot go over, if I prove we can spend this, he's going to give us more money and I'm going to get more management fee. But he'd lost his mind at the $2 more
Right.
because obviously he thought the client was going to kick off and he was going to have to reimburse somehow. $2. I'd pay for it, I said. He was worried because it wasn't sort of agreed ad spend.
I see.
That he was so overprotective about that, because I think ultimately his fear was if somebody ever massively overspent, the company, which they would be if it's unagreed ad spend, is liable to pay for that money. And even though it was such a small amount,
I understand.
I think even though it was such a small amount, he was like, oh, this can't, so he sort of lay a ton of bricks on me rather than being, rational about it, because he thought, well, it just shows that he didn't have the respect in me if he obviously thought that I was just going to spend money willy-nilly. But that's the Britishism, is it? Willy-nilly.
I know that one.
So I think if he'd shown me more respect and looked at the track history and the track record, he'd see that, that wasn't a common thing.
So yeah, him not treating with the respect is similar to the treating like a technician, not a professional. But this light bulb that went off, is there are a few interesting lessons and consequences of that. In intelligence circles, there's a concept called target fixation, which is basically you become so obsessed with some target, you just like forget everything else that's actually mattered. So it seems like your manager suffered from this like fixation on yeah. So, and it's interesting because like sometimes people just do get really into like, you get some number, some goal, and it's not necessarily bad, and it's really hard to realize when you're becoming too fixated on it. I wonder if in retrospect, if there's any strategy that could be done when people become so fixated on the target in order to bring them back to earth.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to know what that would be, because
But
sometimes those people who are so fixated on those issues are the ones who won't make time, or won't make time to actually learn. Like, I'm too busy for this, but that's what I want, and I'm obsessed with this figure, and I will only check in on that number. Well, can I talk to you about? No, I'm too busy. This is what I want. It tends to be those kind of people who have those fixations, from my experience.
yeah, I agree. I'll also point out, it's interesting that that being so fixated on just getting to this one number, that he also flipped out earlier in the story when you went 2 pounds over the budget, because I was like, oh my God, we'll be responsible for that. And that also shows me that he couldn't not only did he fail in communicating with you, he also failed in communicating with a client, because every single client in the entire universe, hey, we went $2 over the budget this month. Can I buy you a cup of coffee instead? Like 100% of clients were like, yeah, like no worries about that. Yeah. So there's like multi-communication breakdown going on there.
Definitely. And I think the manager sort of like presented it as if he was saving me from a bad experience, because he painted this client to be like an absolute monster. And it's quite funny because the client was like insanely tall. He was like 6'5" or something. Like he was so tall, and he was, I think he was a rugby player. He was really built. So this story of him being so scary kind of like went quite well with his image. But when I met him, he was an absolute teddy bear. He was so nice, and he was so, and he was one of these people who had, like a really, really small dog. You'd expect him to have like pit bulls on both arms, but no, he had like a chihuahua or something. And he was just such a nice guy. And I'd been blocked from this person that, you know, if you don't do this correctly, we're going to lose the contract. Obviously, now I realized he'd been ticking along for so long as a legacy client, but he wanted to really start ramping things up because he'd had investment or whatever.
Right.
I'd been blocked from this person. It was made out to be some sort of absolute horror bag, but he was amazing. And he was like, I'm so glad I've met you. I want to make sure that you're in all of the meetings because, you know, I really value your input. And me, smuggy, was like, haha.
Another new favorite phrase of mine, me, smuggy.
Smuggy.
Yeah, these are great lessons when it's one of the meta lessons is when there are incompetent people in the middle. It just becomes really important to get to figure out how to get around them to get right to the client or the person on the front lines.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something that I've learned from this experience and similar other experiences is when I have those initial, I don't work at the same place now, but I'm always involved in the meetings. And when I am speaking to the client, if they say something that even just, you know, raises a little flag, I go, okay, stop, let's talk about this. You know, let me understand. Just make sure you understand where I'm coming from. And there was a client, just an example, that followed up on this. He only wanted to spend £500 a month. And he said, what do you think I'm going to get back? I mean, I think every PPC hates forecasting, especially when there's no historical data in the account. So I said, you're probably going to get for that budget maybe about 5 or 6 conversions a month. And he was like, is that it? I'm like, that's a conversion rate of 4%. Like, that's quite a high conversion rate. And he looked horrified. And I said, right, let's break it down. And when he realized, he said, oh yeah, actually, that is a high percentage of people who are then converting. Oh, well, why don't I give you £1,500 and then see if, you know, you can get some more traction? I was like, that never happens. Like, lights coming down from heaven, an angel coming down. And, you know, I was like, you are my favorite client. But because I set his expectations and was realistic and re-educated him that, like, I know it sounds low, but also your average order value, if one person converts from those 6 inquiries, that would pay your marketing for the rest of the year. Because he worked in flooring, like installation.
My favorite sales tool is education for exactly this reason. Often they don't understand. Oh, if I spend more, I can get more.
Yeah, exactly. You know, because if you double your budget, doesn't always mean you're going to get double the inquiries straight away, but it gives you more data that you can learn from, refine. You've got your machine learning, will then, you know, start to learn more. It's cheesy, but you do have to speculate to accumulate. You do, totally. Especially when there's been no historical data before and you're starting from scratch.
I also want to extract another lesson from the story about boss and the client and what happened, which is this is also a good example of how agency incentives are different than the client incentives. Like your company makes more money because you can charge more if more is spent like this, but it's not in your client's best interest for you to be obsessing over exactly hitting this number. And I think one of the general struggles of any complex and deep personal relationship or a professional relationship is figuring out how to make sure everyone's incentives are fully aligned.
Exactly. And the irony is, of all those months and weeks and days that I was in checking that budget, if I hadn't been so in that account, and my team member as well in that account, it would have been so much more profitable if we were just allowed to do our own thing. The amount of time that we spent on it made actually probably, after everything, it was unprofitable. Like, we're in the negative because of the amount of time that could have been put into the effort of new clients or bringing new clients on board,
Totally.
or
Totally.
growing other accounts. So that's the ironic thing.
Isn't it ironic? Yeah.
There's
This
a
is
song
a,
there.
I know. I was humming the Alanis
I could
Morissette
see
in my
you thinking about it.
in previous podcasts. I would quote forgotten Latin poetry, but today I'm quoting like cheesy songs from the early 2000s.
Amazing. It's like it was the best time for music, I think.
At least best time since the 70s.
Yeah, go on, yeah.
Any great story. I'm happy it ended happily once you got the middleman out of the way. Any other lessons that you want to share, or
I think
things that you've learned from this experience?
I think definitely for me is, again, it sounds probably quite cheesy, but you know that you know your stuff. And there's something that one of my bosses, when I first got into PPC, always would say to me if I doubted myself was, you know more than the client. Don't use that in as a weapon or an arrogant way, but believe in it's so cheesy, but believe in yourself, and you do know your stuff, and don't let anybody who's not a professional try and tell you otherwise, but always learn from your colleagues as well. Because everybody, especially with something like Google Ads and digital marketing, good Lord, you can log into analytics and something's changed and you're like, and you have to Google something. So, just be adaptable and believe that you know your stuff, and be willing to learn from other people.
And that's a good lesson. I think I like this distinction between being hired as a technician, like the guy to follow orders, guy or girl to follow orders, or the person who you want to give advice and follow. And if it's the latter case, like you're hired because you know more than the other person. If the other person knows more, then they would just hire someone to follow orders. So, I like approaching that same issue is to be super clear whether you're being hired as the expert professional or as the technician wants to follow orders, because often the two are linked, and especially for something like in digital marketing, where like if you hire an architect, it's less of an issue because I don't want the building to collapse, I trust him. But in something like digital marketing, everyone has an opinion on what keyword to use, what ad text to use, even if they know nothing about it. Everyone invents ad copy, and they think they're the professional. So
I've had clients go, oh yeah, Google Ads, that's the thing with the quality score, isn't it? Yeah, tell me the formula for quality score. I don't know. Like, yeah, exactly. Back in your seat.
these are great lessons, and I think I have an opportunity to bring in some mostly forgotten in early modern poetry. Reminds you of Alexander Pope's line in his an essay on criticism. He goes, "A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or not from the Pierian spring." And I always like that. Like, yeah, a little learning is a dangerous thing. So like the sorts of clients or the sorts of bosses, like your boss who knows a little bit, like, is just enough to cause damage, but he didn't drink deeply enough from the spring to really understand the subtle details of what happened. Like that's the most dangerous situation of all.
Definitely. I don't know if it's a British phrase or like jack of all trades, master of none.
Is it in the US as well?
Oh, yeah. So it's kind of like, somebody who runs a digital marketing agency thinks he knows paid social, thinks he knows SEO, he knows little snippets, but you're not an expert in any of them. You just, know the right buzzwords to say every now and then to sort of like make the people who don't really know better think that you're a genius.
Totally.
And then
Totally.
if you put them in an ad campaign, they'd be like, they'd probably, I don't know, set the maximum bid at like $1,000 and £1 million budget, and wonder why
And
they
disaster.
funded Google's next Christmas party.
Exactly. Disaster ensues.
Yeah.
Okay, this was great. Good story. Lots of lessons, and after a bunch of chatting online, happy to finally, not quite face to face meet you, but Zoom to Zoom meet you.
Nice to Zoom you.
nice to Zoom you.
I promise never ever to say that again, because as soon as it came out of my mouth, it just sounded so cringy. I'm so sorry.
In that case, we're definitely not going to edit it out. I'm going to keep it in for maximal cringe value.
Definitely. Go on, I'll let you.
Hey, the new world order is here now, so we need to just accept, like, this is the way of the future.
Just embrace it. Yeah.
Just lucky you're drinking gin, because you need to drink gin in order to embrace it.
This one now, this isn't this in my very classy Captain Jack Sparrow glass. This is my child's glass. That's not gin now. I might leave it, because I know the child will be up at. The children know, they've got this sensor. They go, "Mummy's had a gin. I'm going to get up at 5 a.m." They know. So
the universe works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
Okay, it was fun talking, and everyone watching who made it to the end, I hope you enjoyed it and learned as much as we did. Thank you for watching. To be continued.